This transmission is a 2008 transmission that comes off a Lamborghini Gallardo. Now, this transmission is labeled as a core, meaning that it's for parts only. It doesn't work, but it looks fine on the outside. This transmission is actually an E-gear transmission or an R-tronic transmission, meaning that there is a hydraulic actuator that sits on top of this transmission, as you can see here, that actuates the clutch and shifts the forks for you automatically. So I was very excited when I found this transmission because I was trying to find a junk scrap transmission to dismantle and take apart and understand how it works, as well as to practice rebuilding this type of transmission. So whenever my car needs new synchros, I could go ahead, pull the transmission myself, and rebuild it myself. Now, this is not the first time I've taken apart any transmission. I've taken 2 classes at my community college and studied transmission theory for both the automatic torque converter type of transmissions as well as the typical manual transmissions that you'll find that this transmission has. And I've actually come to really love the inner workings of a transmission, and I wanted to further my education and get my hands on a Graziano L140 transmission, which is the same transmission that's being used in the Lamborghini Gallardo as well as the Generation 1 Audi R8s for the R-tronic and gated manual versions. Now, one thing to note is that this transmission comes from a pre-LP Gallardo, meaning that it is a first generation Lamborghini Gallardo. The shift forks and the shift linkages are the same in the gated manual version of the Gallardo as well as the gated manual version of the Audi R8 Gen 1. So in theory, this transmission can be used for a manual swap if you were to manual swap your Gallardo or if you wanted to manual swap your Audi R8. Furthermore, I also wanted to educate Gallardo and Audi R8 owners on what it takes to rebuild and repair these type of transmissions. So whenever you need new synchros or if you need a new bearing, I'll show you what it takes to rebuild and replace parts in this transmission so you'll have a better understanding of the type of labor needed to rebuild this transmission. I've also noticed that the shift forks actually work. They all lock in and they all shift fine. There's no lockup of the shift forks or the shift collars. So already I could tell that there's nothing wrong with the actual shifting components of it. Now, it still doesn't mean that the transmission should work. I need to dive in and look at all the bearings and measure the tolerances of the synchros. Maybe the synchros popped out, who knows. Now, before we dive in, I would love your support by hitting the like button on this video, as well as smashing that subscribe button on this channel. If you're inclined to want to support me even more, I actually have set up a Buy Me a Coffee link below in the description of this video. With enough support, maybe I can get my hands on a dual clutch for the Audi R8 / Lamborghini Huracan and take that apart and show you how that transmission works. So I'm going to dive in and strip every nut, bolt, washer, bearing, and gear in this transmission to figure out what went wrong. Just hopefully I could salvage this transmission and have it ready for its next owner. So I found out that this transmission was a core return from a shop. And I talked with the junkyard. They told me that, yeah, they got this core transmission and the shop reported that this transmission was not shifting. Here's the story. Every one of these busted parts have a story. So the owner of this Lamborghini Gallardo took it to a person to change out the clutch. So the owner drove it and got a report that the transmission fluid was low. So this person took it to another shop, and the shop pulled the transmission, inspected the clutch, flushed out the old transmission fluid, and then filled it back up. And then when they tested the transmission, it did not shift. And the shop verified that the electronics, all the hydraulic actuators, the electronics work, and they worked fine. So it wasn't that. It was somehow related to this transmission, and it was not shifting. So what they did was they called the junkyard. The junkyard gave them their transmission in exchange for a core, such as this transmission, and the shop reported that the transmission that they got from the junkyard worked. So it reported to not be shifting at all under operating temperature. So the first step into dismantling this transmission is to take off the 12 bolts that you see here. You take these off, You pry this out and then you carefully take out the differential. It looks like there's some thread locker here, so if you're gonna put this back together, yeah, we need to clean off this thread locker and then put new thread locker back on these bolts. So next step, after you've taken out the differential right here, you need to mount your transmission vertically so you can easily take out the rear case, the gear case, the sandwich plate, all of that. So when you mount this transmission vertically, you need to get a block of wood, a pallet, or anything, because you need a little gap here for the drive shaft here, because you can't just lay the bell housing side on the floor straight through. What we're gonna do now is going to remove this oil cooler line, as well as these, I think these are 13mm bolts, and take out this rear casing here. One thing to note, for any of these casings, if you're not aware, there are certain areas where there is an overhang. So you can get in with a screwdriver or some sort of metal object to carefully knock out the casing and separate it from the sealant. Right here, there is an overhang here that you're gonna use this to knock this out, as well as a slight overhang here. You can use that. Unscrew the casing and then use a screwdriver to knock this out so you can get a little gap, and then use a screwdriver to carefully pry open the rear case. You gotta be very careful, because once you start prying this open, if you're not careful, you can mar the surface. You can gouge the surface here, and once you do that, you need to get this surface remachined so it's nice and smooth, so the RTP sealant can seal in this entire housing over here. So let's take a look at the rear housing. This is the input shaft, this is the idler here, and this is the reverse gear. So let's look at the surface here. You can see here that there's remnants of this little red, let me zoom in here. If you look at that, that is remnants of the original gasket. This was not sealed with anaerobic sealant, because if you look at the housing here, they use some sort of RTV gray sealant. So I can already tell that someone has been in here already, doing who knows what, probably trying to figure out what went wrong with this transmission. I don't know. I could also see like some uneven peening here. Let's zoom in on this lockout nut here. You can see here, this is peened in here, and in here, this nut keeps this whole synchro unit intact. And you can see here, they peened it a little bit too much. They went too wild, because that's not supposed to happen. You really went in and smashed this metal here. There's a little crack in the metal here. They went in so much, it's gonna be hard to actually try to unpeen this, because usually you would need to get a screwdriver and then knock this in, so like you can try to get this out, so you can then take out this nut. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do to try to unpeen this part here. To me, this is shoddy work right here. Furthermore, let's look at this. This is fine, and this peening is actually fine. So I'm gonna try to unpeen this nut here, and then take these off. And these nuts are actually one use only, according to the factory. However, there is a way to reuse them if you unpeen them correctly, and then you carefully wrench it out and not use an impact wrench, but actually use a breaker bar and take these out carefully so you don't destroy the metal around here. So there was absolutely no way for me to unpin these parts here and try to save these nuts. So just ended up doing was I just had to go in with an impact wrench and just zip it off this way. It's fine because they designed for this metal to be softer than this metal here. So these valleys here are fine because what happens with the impact, it vibrates and unscrews and just rips out the metal pieces over here. Now, here's the thing. Now you have metal pieces everywhere in this transmission. If you were going to rebuild this, you're gonna have to run it through a parts machine, sandblast it anyway. So I would say don't worry about it. Only worry if you should only worry about this if you were to do a manual conversion on this and you don't have the entire transmission out. So you gotta be careful. Like, let's hope for your sake that you don't run into shoddy work that I'm running into right now. So it's very interesting. So for you people who are watching this, make sure that the person you're hiring has a good history of being very precise and being very detailed oriented. Because again, yeah, see here, if they had pinned this only enough, you could unpin this and save these nuts and repin them. But now, if we were going to say salvage this, I would have to get new nuts, and these are quite expensive. So next up is to actually now get off this idler gear. You could take off this reverse gear here, and then start taking off the synchro assembly. So one thing to note, there are two pins here that hold this reverse fork in. So you're gonna need to get a little punch here and hammer this out. This brass piece is the synchro blocker ring, and these little guys, the teeth are the dog teeth that actually lock into the dog teeth over here on the speed gear. Got the reverse gear, but I will need to get this idler gear out. There are needle bearings here, and then there is another bearing here that you can pry out with the little screwdriver here. You also need to pry out this gear. Also needs to come out as well, so you can try to get a little screwdriver and carefully pry out this reverse gear as well. So the next step is to obviously take this gear housing off. You have 12 of these nuts that you need to zip off, plus 3 additional nuts that you need to zip off here. These are actually attached to a stud here that is attached here. So this is the first stud, and here are the other 2 studs here. Take all of them off, and then again, try to find overhangs like this here. There's some overhangs here to actually go in, tap off this casing with the screwdriver, so then you'll be able to take off the gear housing like so. Very good news, this housing has never been touched. I don't believe so, because all I see are remnants of an anaerobic gasket here. So this is very good news. I don't see any signs of marring or anything like that. So pretty confident that these gears here have not been touched. So the next step in this process is to take out these 2 locking nuts here. And now these nuts here are special locking nuts, and they kind of look like castle nuts. on suspension, and you actually need to get a special tool such as this to take this out. If you do not want to get this tool, you can get a normal socket and then use a grinder to grind out and cut these slats here for you. For me, I'm just gonna buy this tool here, and it's gonna make the job very easy. So once you have this tool, you now need to engage these two forks here. Yes, these two middle forks, and push them down towards the bell housing right here. It's now locked, and then you can now get your breaker bar and remove these nuts. And here we go. Both of these nuts are removed. Just be patient because they are locked in with Loctite. The next step is to get a rubber mallet, and we're gonna go and push this out, making sure that we have a hand ready to catch the pinion shaft down here. So make sure you have a steady hand to catch this shaft when you're pushing this out. So let's take a look at this pinion shaft here. There is a tapered roller bearing on one end of the shaft, and there is another tapered bearing on this end of the shaft here. And I checked these tapered roller bearings and they seem fine. They are smooth. There's no cracks or nicks to anything like that. It spins fine, as well as this. So we know that the pinion gear is fine. Anything related to this mechanism here is okay. So I'm gonna continue to look at the other physical parts of this transmission and figure out what went wrong. So next step is to take out a couple of fasteners here that we need to separate this sandwich plate off from the rest of the differential housing here. So the fasteners have been removed from the sandwich plate. Now, trying to figure out how to separate this plate from the differential housing, it looks like there are overhangs here, and then see all the way throughout here as well. But the issue is the overhangs are on this side of the housing and not on this. So you can't tap up here, you need to tap down, meaning that you need to hang this entire piece, and then from there you can then tap down here to separate the housing. So I'm going to show you what you need to do to hang this piece of equipment here. And this is the tool that the factory service manual recommends you use. It is a practically a holding tool that holds on to the two shafts here, and you use your existing reverse collar nuts here, and then you'll be able to then use like an engine crane and to be able to take off both drive shafts with the gears all in one. And this allows you to engage, lift this up, and then start tapping down on these overhangs here, so you could then separate the sandwich plate with the differential housing. So let's go and separate that right now. So as you can see here, with this tool, I'm able to use it to mount it to my engine stand over here. And now I'm able to actually flip this around and work on this side and figure out how to separate this bearing housing from the two shafts here. And that's the next step, really. As you can see here, this is the differential housing here. So I'm gonna go in and actually try to take out the drive shafts and look at the bearings, check everything that can fail right here. So this is what is connected to the input shaft, and it's splined in this way. And you can see here, this is the front drive shaft here. I am turning this over here. So the next part will involve me taking out this nut, these two nuts here, as well as these two gears here that you see in front of you. And these are actually the transfer gears or spur gears that actually transfer the power from the output shaft here to the pinion gear, as well as to the front drive shaft. So next time I'm gonna take off this bearing housing here, or sandwich plate, and then after that, I'm gonna go in and press out all of these gears and then inspect every gear and every synchro and see if any of them have been burnt out or been cracked, whatnot. Let's see what was preventing this transmission from shifting.